Oh
on
yeah?
some real stuff as we start the Trainman report. What's up, everyone? I actually during oh I gotta mute that. I shouldn't be hearing that.
Are we live?
Whoa, what's happening here? Okay,
Are we
perfect. We're
live?
good. We are live. Sorry
Oh, we're
about that,
live.
everyone.
All
I was
right.
facing
Yay.
some issues where I had me coming through the speakers, and I was like, oh no, this is a really bad echo to be having. The start of this up. We fixed it. We're good. The STM had a shop, and they were selling this amazing Christmas sweater of the STM map, and it said on the bottom, ho, ho, ho. Which I was like, well, a lot of people call me Ho Ho, so this was already designed for me. And it was spoofing all the Metro names with like goofy, like Christmas themed versions of them all, and it was really cute and fun. So I bought that along with an STM map mask, and they did make it, but the shipping was stupid expensive, and the pickup location was wildly inconvenient, and they could do a lot better because I don't think they realize how much rappers would spend on STM merch if it was available for us. I don't
So,
think they
so,
Yeah.
know it.
so, ladies
And
and
if they had a
gentlemen,
good designer,
yeah, ladies and gentlemen, this show has started talking about, SDM merch.
That's the beginning. It was organic. What's up, everyone? Welcome to the 36th episode of the Trainman Report. My name is Holden Stefan Roy. As always, we have the Trainman himself, Alex Montagano, and joining us today is Morse Attack. That is his artist name. Given the conversation, he's all like, I don't want to get in trouble with the man. And we were like, bet, we'll use the artist name. I respect it. That means we're going to have honest conversations, people. It's a
Honest
blessing.
conversations.
It's a blessing. But before we get into everything, we need to get a little update on something. You see, Alex is a contractor over here. And what I understand is, Alex, as a contractor, you may have some insight on how the infamous Bonjour Hi artist has been doing their thing around NDG. And with a gun pressed to my head ahead of time, I was asked to ask this question. How is the Bonjour Hi artist doing his thing, Mr. Contractor Alex? Wink, wink.
All right. Thank you for that, Holden. I really don't know how I should be absorbing that, but I'll just thank you nonetheless. Yeah, so as a contractor, I've been observing the activities of the artist, and I was trying to, I guess, communicate to the audience how I believe he or she or they are going about it, and I'm going to relate directly to my experience of running into the city of Montreal that was putting line art on the streets for the Terrebonne bike path, actually, that we're going to discuss later in the show. And they use like just a masonite board. It's really inexpensive. It's a pretty cheap material. You can buy it Reno Depot, Rona Home Hardware. It's going about like, I'd say about $14.99 a sheet right now. It comes in 4x8 sections, and it can be easily cut with just a really sharp utility knife. Obviously, for corners and rounded edges, you probably would need yourself a jigsaw with a very thin blade to cut those corners out. And that's basically it. It's not really sophisticated stuff. Yeah, so like the city, it'd be dropped on a sidewalk. Then the paint would be applied to it. And obviously the template would make sure the paint only goes to the sections that create the image. Of course, that's what a template does. And that is the basic mechanics behind it. Like anybody with basic, how do you say, handicraft skills could probably pull this off. It is not technically challenging whatsoever. So, that's the juice behind it. But I should get to the larger community updates that are happening right now. We kind of jumped ahead there, Holden, a bit, but that's fine. What I wanted to say,
we came in hot with Bonjour Hi. That's the exciting
so we
stuff.
came in hot.
Dude,
And that is a very hot topic. That is
I
what's
believe the
happening.
artist even struck again with other messaging, is what I heard
Yes.
through the grapevine.
Yes.
If you want to just comment a bit on that.
Yeah, very interesting development. The artist hit the Snowden area, on Victoria area, Victoria Van Horn, Plamondon, gifted Plamondon Metro. And this time, what's really interesting is that they're starting to kind of like cross into cultural divides here, try to, I don't know if you call it divide, but cross over into other cultures, they he or it or she created an image, a symbol of, it's the Filipino sun that you find on the Filipino flag. It's very symbolic of the Filipino nation, the Filipino identity. And the text included, I don't know if I'm pronouncing this right, but kamusta, which means hello, how are you in Filipino, along with Bonjour Hi. And these were located outside the prominent Filipino parishes of St. Kevin's, St. Malachy's, and also in front of I believe, the Filipino Community Center. And yeah, so that's very, very interesting development. And
so the real question is, have they been removed yet?
I don't know. I'm not monitoring it at that level. I just get, stuff coming in I can't say. And then the other big news is that there's been a real the last week, a lot of stuff happened. We had the original Suburban article, then it came out in the press, the Gazette, the Hill Times in Ottawa, of all places. Andrew Goodell did an article on that. And the manifesto that was posted on Thrive is now like, it's passing 658 likes, loves. So really an enormous amount of interest and support for the activity of the artists. And then Nancy Bretman, who can be found on Thrive, is now organizing requests from the public, private people, private homeowners, or for them who want the artist to pay them a visit. So that's all interesting. And the big news of the day, you heard it here first. John Jordan was gifted a whole bunch of these like art pieces, like basically the Bonjour Highs and the cat, the meow, and the woof, on what it seems to look like 3 feet by 7 feet pieces of it's tar paper. It's a cheap material, I guess. Cost was driving this, and those are being given away for free at the Alley Cat Gallery, which is located on Sherbrooke, right beside Esposito's. So that is a huge, massive development, and that's getting a lot of attention online on Thrive as well. So very, very exciting.
All that to say, if we can summarize this, the key takeaways are: you can easily copycat this. Please do. The artist would like it to be known that you can easily purchase supplies and make it so that there's a lot of artists, and thus it becomes a bigger movement. And you can get free takeaway copies for the moment from John Jordan at the Cat Cafe.
And you can actually use those free takeaways from John Jordan to make exact replicas if you want to. You just cut out the letters and the imagery, and you just create your own templates based on the information I already provided.
And if you have a driveway and want your driveway tagged by this Bonjour Hi artist to come through and do the tagging, you can do that on your private property, and you can reach out and get that to happen.
Nancy Bretman is the person who's been coordinating this. So yeah, all very exciting. Yeah. And then there was, unfortunately, the bad news in the last week, and I'm exhausted because of it, because I'm a general contractor, is people got flooded. Like, they got seriously flooded. Oof. I was in Pierrefonds today, and man, it's a mess out there. I've been in homes that the water was like 5 feet high in the basement. There was like basically swimming pools in people's basements. It's just brutal. And there's like piles of, like, you drive along, Pierrefonds Boulevard, and you'll see these huge piles of waste of people who are just emptying their basements of this waterlogged, damaged contents. It's just a mess. And I've been going nonstop for the last since the storm, and I gotta say, I am exhausted. I am just like tired.
Were either of you out there in the storm?
I wasn't hit, fortunately.
Yeah, were you out in the storm?
Me? I was.
Yeah, you did Uber.
Money.
Didn't you do Uber money that day?
Quite a day for Uber. I wasn't out there during like the daytime when apparently the flooding was at its like worst, but I was out there in like around 4 or 5 in the morning on Friday, and then overnight as the storm progressed through the evening. I was there till the storm was done, and then it was just over. But yeah, good money. All I can say.
Yeah, you were dry though on Fielding.
I mean, building was all right. My building didn't flood. I don't think we have as many issues as they have in other places.
Yeah, we're
Where, like
any
two
and
blocks away will flood, but we'll not flood. Don't worry, we'll have all our other problems. But I
yeah, we're
don't. You
the
don't usually see us complaining about flooding.
the major flood area is up it's almost where Montreal West starts. It's like northern west NDG. Patricia and Connaught were the main intersection, was the main intersection where you had this major massive flooding. So if you're in NDG and you were flooded and you're looking for support, there is a Facebook group called the H4 _ basement flooding that is being managed by Ilana Grovestern, and she's actually suing the city for negligence, because the sewer system up there has not been updated and maintained properly, and they did some things because the extent of the flooding this time was much less than it was before. So that's what she's doing. So if you want to reach out to her, you can find her group called, again, I'm going to repeat, H4 _ basement flooding. So
Bet.
any other
There's a
commentary?
bunch of stuff at the Wheel Club. Oh,
Yeah.
I will say to go into that, NDG Arts Week starts this week. I'm part of Notre Dame des Arts, so I feel like we should plug it while some
Yes.
people are watching. We have a free party going on at Girard Park this Saturday. There's a poetry reading, I believe, on Monday. If you check out the Notre Dame des Arts page, you'll be able to see the full list of activities, but there's a whole bunch of stuff leading into the Monkland Festival, some collaborative things happening, and you should check that out. A lot of it's free. I think most of it is free. Some of it might cost a little bit. I should know more, but I don't. Sorry, y'all.
I believe it's
But
all free. Yeah, I don't
yeah,
believe
at least the
it's a
park
great
party's
thing.
free.
Yeah.
And there's gonna be like an afternoon section where we do some stuff, and then like leading into like a concert. So you should come out for that, show some love. I'll be going around and putting posters up later. I'm not doing the ones that you already see up, so you know we're gonna flood the neighborhood a little bit with some advertisements and let y'all see it there. So check that out. It will be a good time.
Yeah, and that's
And
great. I'm really happy you raised that because I know that Friday evening, Dave Lazar and the Flaming Iguanas, is that what they're called? Will be
yeah,
will be playing. And don't forget there's a parade, which I'll be at in full train regalia, and I'll be there in my train trike. So it's a puppet parade. Everybody's invited. Please come
yeah.
all. It's gonna be a great
Yo,
time.
and,
That's
and
on Monkland.
don't think it's just like regular little hand puppets or whatever. We talking
No,
like this
serious
is
stuff,
like
man.
this is puppets for grown-ups, right? Like this is some like real architecture cosplay styled puppetry that's going on that like when you hear it you don't really envision what's happening, and I highly encourage you to come check out the puppet parade. And if you do want to participate, there's a whole puppet parade workshop happening throughout the week, pretty much every day, where you can come link up with people who can help you make your puppet look really fire.
Yeah, and they're looking for volunteers to participate in the parade. I'll be there passing out cold drinks, and yeah, it's going to be a good time. So I
I
would
believe
encourage
I'm gonna
people.
be blocking traffic.
Oh, you're blocking traffic. Good for you. Yeah, I'll be kind of circling around in the train trike and passing out emergency refreshments to the band because there's a concern that the heat may be a lot for people to deal with. But so putting a not I say a wrap on that, let's get to our
Yeah.
special guest, Morse Attack. And the reason why I invited him on the show is he is a fountain of knowledge as it relates to the building of cities. Specifically, it relates to transportation and how this dynamic affects urban sprawl. Um, he studied and published on that topic, as well as the impact of remote work. He's done analysis of bike count flows, and we thought it'd be great to have him here on the show because, as you know, we just have finalized the Terrebonne bike path, and everybody's kind of coming to terms with that new reality. And I thought it'd be great. Holden, excuse me, thought it'd be great for him to be on the show to share his knowledge with us. So I guess there, Morse Attack, the way we start our show is we always ask our guests to give us their origin stories. Where were you born? Where were you brought up? Where did you go to school? What makes you tick? All that kind of stuff, right? Shoot.
So I was created in the Eastern Townships,
Mm-hmm.
and my father was a construction worker, and my mother was an artist. So both these disciplines, I guess, find themselves a little bit in my background. I became a graffiti artist pretty young, and I've always merged that passion with like the city, the rail networks. We were talking about trains before. I used to paint graffiti on the trains, and finding hiding in all the little spots. It's really like a superhero adventure when you're 15 years old and you're going into graffiti in the city. But it also creates this crazy appreciation for the built form and all the little nooks and crannies you can discover within the city. And so I moved to Montreal when I was 17 to really pursue that passion for hip hop culture, graffiti, rap music, and so on and so forth. And I followed in that path for a very long time. I worked for a store called Sub V that was in NDG. Maybe some of your viewers have heard of it. We used to sell spray paint and artist t-shirts and merch. So I worked there for a long time. I also worked for a company called A Shop. So maybe you guys know also the Notre Dame de Grasse mural, the great big mural that's kind of in a Muka style Art Nouveau. It's on Sherbrooke, I think. It's that beautiful lady with the pumpkin patches in the back. So I worked for them for quite a bit, for like 3 years. Then I worked in Rosemont.
That's the mural that's right, that the huge massive mural that's right beside the what is it, the Bonnie Soir, or what was it called again?
Yeah,
Yeah, is that what we're talking about?
exactly.
Excellent. It's a beautiful mural. Gorgeous.
Yeah,
So
maybe we
you
could put,
worked on
can
that,
we
or
put up
like?
stuff on yeah, we
I
could put it up on
mean,
the screen, eh?
I don't know how easy it'll be to find them. I'll Google it, and if I can find it, we'll put it up. If it's that easy.
So please
But
Right.
continue. So you work
Yeah,
with
just
that.
if you're looking for it, just write
I'm
Notre Dame de Grace mural, Our Lady of Grace mural. It'll pop up real quick. And NDG. So yeah, I worked there. Then I worked
oh,
in a
yeah,
mural
I did.
project. You found it?
Yeah, hang on.
I think it's a good visual explainer of like the level of
Yeah, this one. But yeah.
we got a Ukrainian commenter joining
We're
us
getting
here.
some Ukrainian news here.
What's going on
Different
here?
show. This is local news show, people. All
Where are we getting the Ukrainian comment?
Is
right,
this
so
on
there's
my
the
side
mural.
here?
So let's shut that down there, Holden, because we're getting some feedback from something else that's on your computer.
Wait, what are we talking about?
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we
So
saw that
you were
and had an
involved in
update
that
on Ukraine.
you were involved with that project,
I,
that lady Notre Dame de Grasse, that project
So
there.
at the point where they did that project, I was still working for Sub V. So
Right.
Sub V actually it was a small boutique, but we are also the biggest supplier of this crazy German imported
oh,
spray paint
I know
for
what
murals.
happened. Sorry
And
about that.
so I was a partner with them at that point. I supplied the spray paint for them.
Mm,
And then later on they hired me, so I started working for them as a project manager. So I
mm.
worked for them for 3 years. We did some pretty crazy projects um all
They
over
had
the
a
place.
website called Bombing Signs, if I remember correctly.
That's correct. That was the supplier website. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Mm,
I also worked in les ruelles vertes. I
mm.
don't know what they call it in English, but
Alleys.
the green alleys. That's it.
Yeah.
So I did the Rosemont green alleys for 2 years.
You're working for
When
the city of Montreal in this capacity?
So it's a program called Eco, a paramunicipal organization. What that
I
means
see.
is that it's a nonprofit that is basically their only client is the city.
I see.
Right.
So I did that. That was really interesting because you really get to meet, the people behind it, and especially around mural projects, you can really see how citizens sometimes are in this beautiful harmony, but sometimes they just don't agree on really basic stuff like what color the mural should be, and it can get pretty hectic and chaotic.
Mm-hmm.
And but there was also a big element of that was street safety for kids. So it was a lot of mothers that were shepherding these projects, mostly young mothers, and there was always a clash between the people who feel that it's unfair that they have to go around the block and it takes them 2 minutes more because there's a red light, and then the mothers who want the safety of their kids playing in the backyard. So there's a lot of
So you're talking about creating these green alleys where kids could play and not feel like they were at risk getting hit by automobiles and stuff like that.
Yeah, correct. So what they do is, for people who don't know, it's like most alleys in Montreal are like a H. You guys in NDG don't have many alleys, but most, like in
We
Hose
have
Mall.
them. We do have them.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's like mostly they're in a H. So what you do is you just block two entries, so it becomes an S shape,
Mm-hmm.
which means it becomes like a one way now, which really slows down the traffic.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes they even block sections of the alleyway, but you really need the consent of like the people living there
They do that
first.
in Sud-West. If the neighbors agree, they'll shut down the whole alleyway and they'll turn into it like a public garden, like a open public space, which is really cool. But getting
Yeah, some
people
of
to
them
agree is difficult. It's not easy sometimes.
it's difficult, and that's the thing with urban planning, eh? Urban planning is an act of power, and everything you do has winners or losers.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very important to understand that urban planning, and I think politics in general, is there's never a right answer. There's only a well thought out answer and a maximizing utility answer, or maybe maximizing the benefit of a particular group, which could be a dominant group or it could be a minority group. So there's advantages to also to that approach. So
That
yeah, that
makes
really.
that makes a lot of sense because we went through the Terrebonne
Oh man.
saga, if I could use that word, and yeah, there wasn't really a right answer and there really wasn't a wrong answer, and there was a lot of like friction within the community between different groups about the installation and implementation of the bike path.
That's
Basically, it
exactly
was
it.
the
And
people that were affected by it directly were real mad, and the rest of us were like, we're not real mad. This makes sense.
Well, also, people who are cyclists, you know, who wanna people who are have, I guess, I don't want to like demonize or put a certain group down. Everybody had their justifiable positions, but obviously, if you're a person who's keen and in active living, which is usually a younger type set, because you have good mobility, right? You can still ride a bike, you can walk and do all those things, right? They were very pro the bike path.
I
So
mean,
whereas
I
for
would say that it's pretty limiting to just leave cyclists as an active living thing. People use cycles for all kinds of reasons. Some people use it because it's the best time route to get to work,
yes,
which
yes,
is my case.
part of
Some
active
people
living, I should
do
point out,
it,
but go
but
on.
it's not. That's not the intention, right? Like some people paint it like people are trying to be healthy with it. A lot of people have different reasons for it, and when you put it like it's a healthy living type of thing, I think it kind of limits the scope of it. There's like a
Fair
giant
enough.
percent. I don't know how big there's a percentage of people that are strictly using bike paths for economic activity now that never really comes up. Like there's all these factors that get excluded if we just talk about the healthy living point of it. Then again, I don't have all the data. I just know these
we
factors
actually
exist.
we have measures of this, and I don't think I can share, but if you activate sharing, I can show you a little map I made
Bet I
of
can do that right now. Hold on
yeah.
1 second. You can now share.
All right, so let's share this map here. So this is a Statistics Canada bike mode share. Okay, so what this represents is not the amount of cyclists or the traffic flows or anything. This represents, on the census, people have to choose what mode they use to go to work most of the time. So do they car to work, bike to work, uh, metro to work, whatnot. So it gets a little complicated because some people do both. Some people will bike to a metro station and then take the metro. They would usually answer metro. So we have to take into consideration this stuff. But this is the bike mode share for every diffusion area of the census. So you could see, for example, in NDG, where the famous Terrebonne path is,
Mhm.
we have a mixture of orange and blue.
Mhm.
Oh, is this sorry, this is the change in bike mode share. I don't have the full bike mode share. That really sucks. So I'm sorry, this is only the change. But you could see like the bike mode share went up a little bit here in
Mhm.
NDG and also went down. So there's like it's fluctuating up and down. But to answer the question, what we would see if this was a map of the actual bike share, it would be between 0 and 15% about,
Mhm.
if I'm correct. And the 15% would be here in the downtown areas.
Mhm.
And in NDG it would probably be somewhere around between 2 and 5% of people that would use it.
The bike paths or using their bikes as a mode of transportation.
Yeah, to go to work. So that doesn't count like going to pick up the kids, going to the store, doing it for leisure. All that stuff is not counted. This is really so, and it's an important statistic because when you plan a city itself exists because people want to be close to employment. So that's a really, really important thing. You always have to consider cities are agglomeration economies. So if people didn't have to go to work or worked on in their house, we'd have a more of a rural type 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 country, right? Because people, they want their space, they want a nice yard, they want whatever, whatnot. So we sacrifice the space in the nice yard because we all want to be living bunched up close to employment opportunities, and people will actually trade off between having a large yard or being close to employment. So that's what creates the density gradient of a city itself.
Well, what
So
about issues related to culture, art, medical services, all that kind of stuff? Does that play into the formula at all?
absolutely. So the formula I'm describing is the Alonzo Muth Mills models, which is
Right.
what we call the standard urban model. So it really is employment versus land trade-off.
I see.
That's
Right.
the big core one, right?
Right.
After that, you have all these smaller considerations about like neighborhood status, access to cultural events, whatever, whatnot, right?
Hmm.
But mostly, and you'll find like a lot of us maybe growing up in the city, we don't see it this way. But when people move to a different area, move to a different city, move to the suburb, or move to Ontario, or move to BC, the main reason that's going to drive that is usually work, right?
Yeah, I agree 100%. Yeah, being able to earn a living to support yourself obviously is one of the driving factors that, dictate the decisions and the choices we make, right?
Right.
Yes, absolutely.
Exactly. It's the biggest choice we have in our life, short of our love life, right?
Right.
So that's why that statistic in particular is important because now we're really talking about people who need cycling for a reason. And I'd
Right.
like to use that as a little segue to kind of lay down the foundations of how the road network is allocated. Because cities are an agglomeration economy, proximity to destinations means lots of people want to be there. When lots of people want to be near a destination, the land value goes up. And that
Right.
land value, the driver of the land value is not what people build on it, the house, the niceness of your house or whatnot. It's proximity to destinations. And those destinations, that's society creates that, right? That there's a lot of shops, a lot of employment, so on and so forth. Society creates that land value collectively. So when you purchase a parcel of land, you're making this trade-off. The land near the opportunities and all that is very expensive. So you'll consume less of it, or you'll build vertically to be able to divide the cost of land among many people. Basically, vertical density and anything like a duplex, what you're doing is you're doubling the amount of land by piling two houses on each other, right? This seems pretty like basic and stuff, but I think we don't reflect about these realities enough when we consider stuff like bike paths. So the road network that we have is not being used to house people. It's being used to transport people. So the size of your road network, the size of your parcels, like how big your street grid is, and the proportion of street width and street grid to housing is super important in the efficiency of your city. And so the way you allocate that space is really crucial, because you want to allocate as little space as possible to get the most people around. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
So if you think of this, so for example, I'll lay this out. The road space itself, we all pay for that. Whether we bike or we take a car, the entire municipal network is paid with our municipal taxes. Okay. The only part of the road network that is carried by the province will be, or federal, will be like highways and some major arteries. Like for example, I think Papineau is under the Quebec government, so on and so forth. But most of the streets is municipal taxes.
Yeah, but isn't Papineau part of the Quebec, provincial, highway
Road network.
system? So that's why it's
Exactly.
covered. Yeah.
That's why it's the provincial that covers that,
So
right?
does that mean
Yeah.
Sherbrooke's also covered by like the Quebec government?
It could be.
That's a good question. If you open the map and you see there's a number on it, then it's provincial.
Yeah.
No, Sherbrooke definitely has a number. Like the GPS is always, well, maybe not the whole Sherbrooke, but the larger part of Sherbrooke, it counts as a highway in Montreal.
Okay. So and sometimes also there'll be a sharing strategy between because like Sherbrooke has sidewalks and stuff, so I doubt the sidewalks are a provincial. So maybe provincial only has, actually when they divide land parcels, each road is an actual land parcel. So if you look at a land parcel map, you'll see little squares for each road slice, right? And then those will be either provincial or municipal or whatever.
Then you have the railways, right?
And then you have the railways,
They're owned
which
by
are
CP or
real,
CN.
exactly. And those can be complicated
I
too.
didn't. Sorry, just I couldn't help myself.
No, but I think that's an interesting point though, because it means that when we look at construction and coordination, already there's two governments involved in managing the roads in Montreal. It's not even just Montreal dealing with itself. It now has to coordinate with the provincial government.
Correct.
Well, not just the provincial, sometimes the feds, and in NEG, believe it or not, there has to be a lot of coordination with CN, because CN owns the lines that go by right beside the Maisonneuve, right? And we have like where you cross over down what's that intersection where Coffee Street is, and you go down Renault Depot to West Haven. Amherst, thank you. Yeah. And there's got to be coordination there with the railways as well. So there's a lot of actors involved. That's for sure.
So long story short, we pay for the entire municipal network. The provincial network is provincial taxes. Most of our provincial taxes come out of our les impôts, income tax, correct. And there's a small, very, very small percent that comes from all your gas taxes and all your taxes associated to your car, matriculation and all that stuff. Sorry if I have French pronunciation.
Oh, it's all good. You're doing great.
It's all good.
Super
we understand everything here.
And so most of the weight, the brunt of like so basically like your gas taxes and your immatriculation and all that stuff, that doesn't even cover like doesn't even pay for the entire street network. So most of it comes from your income tax. So long story short, what I'm trying to get to is every single square foot of road is paid for collectively, no matter what, like if you bike, car, or whatever. Okay. So that's fact number one. And if you look at the value, like the average land value in Montreal, like last time I did this was maybe 2 or 3 years ago, so it's probably changed. But I remember seeing that like an average parking space is worth about $5,000 worth of square foot of land value. So if you took away that parking space and, for example, built a small, a bedroom extension for an apartment, that's what it would be worth, right?
Just the land value, not the actual construction of the extra bedroom.
No, yeah, just the land value. Yeah, just the land value, and that's quite a bit. Mm-hmm. And then there's the maintenance, right? So the maintenance is pretty expensive too. It's in the thousands of dollars per year for even just one parking space.
Right.
So it's
we're
pretty
talking
expensive.
about free parking space on the street right now that people use.
Correct. So if you look at the average triplex, for example, in Montreal, the width of a car in front of that triplex is usually about the width of the triplex, correct? So you got to consider that if there's three families living in this building, one family has a free parking space paid for by everybody's taxes in front, okay? Unless they have a vignette. So if they have a vignette, their vignette is paying, they would, at the prices that vignettes are right now in Montreal, you would have to pay your vignette for 20 years to just make up the value, the land value of that parking space, just to give you an idea of how expensive land is. Okay, so one family is using that parking space. The second family may be lucky and have a parking space in the backyard, the garage, or whatnot. And the third family is paying for that parking space, but is not using it. And actually, the second one either, because they have to park in the back. So for every triplex, that means 1/3 of the population of that building is profiting or benefiting from something that the two other families are paying for. And if you look at the what Montreal is, if you exclude like single family neighborhoods, and you look at any neighborhood that has more than 1 story high building, this is the reality. That the road network, the
Can I
parking
interrupt
space.
with just a question from
Yeah,
the
for sure.
comments? How much does NDG make in parking tickets versus other boroughs? And let's say you don't have that information on hand, which fair enough. How would you go about finding that out? Do you know?
The price of parking tickets is for sure. The revenue from parking tickets is absolutely guaranteed to be publicly available. You could just look at the city budget, and it's going to be absolutely dismal compared to the amount of money that's put it in the network from your taxes. So the parking tickets, first of all, the parking tickets is not a revenue generating operation. Uh, Parking tickets exist to make the parking infrastructure efficient for everyone. Because if someone parks in a parking space and stays there all day, um, other people won't be able to benefit from it. So it's what we call tragedy of the commons in economics, if you've ever heard of that term. So I'll give you a simple example. If I have a store on Saint Laurent Street and someone comes and parks in a free parking space in front of my store, because it's free, they're gonna tend to overuse that parking space. They might chill all day, go somewhere else, visit other stores, go to the restaurant, take their time, and then come back and take their car. So the reason why we price parking is by pricing parking, it becomes a little bit more of a consumer good, and then you can have market like supply and demand starts to play a little bit. So because you're paying the parking, you're like, okay, I'm gonna be efficient with my time and I'm gonna go move my car so somebody else could use that spot. So the
Right.
parking ticket thing is not really a big revenue generating operation. It's really just so we can all benefit from this limited resource, which is a very precious resource. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I've
it
heard
makes
that
total
many times
sense.
before. In fact, I've heard that being said. I've heard that the reason why the city um meters parking spots, it's actually to circulate traffic. It's actually good for the businesses because you don't want someone there dropping their car off and then spending occupying that space all day. And I've even heard some talk from some people saying that there should always be a certain amount of spots available because if there's not, it means you're not charging enough for the parking spot. It's a question of supply and demand, right? So
Correct. That's Donald
it,
Shope, actually, who wrote a whole book about parking, but you are
yeah,
correct.
yeah. So I've heard that talk track, and it makes sense to me. Absolutely. You know, you don't want people plopping their car in a free spot and forgetting about it, right? And you could sit there for weeks and months, right? It collects dust, right? The city can't clean streets. It has to be moved. This is why we have these regulations, right?
This is correct. Actually, even the just well, it's obviously for road maintenance, you have to move the car around and all that, but you'll notice some neighborhoods, some people just use the street as their garage, right? And their
Right.
car is lying there. They don't even use it. It's it's a rare occurrence, but it happens, right?
Right. Well, it's a common phenomena in EG. You know, people will park their cars on the street,
Which you're
right?
allowed to keep your car there for 72 hours without moving it.
Yeah.
So, like, when you end up in a situation with two cars and sometimes you got to use the street as a parking lot, and then you move the car every 3 days to another spot across the street because that's legal.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we have this issue where we have this extremely expensive we don't think of it that way because oh, it's just the street, whatever. It's we take it for granted,
Right.
but the more we maximize, as I said before, the amount of floor space we have to live and have work versus the amount of transportation infrastructure, the more we maximize that, the more we benefit as a society. And so the more we use that resource wastefully and take it for granted and act like it's just this free asphalt that we don't care about,
Hmm.
the less benefit we're getting. And we see that a lot in that built-in inequality that we don't even really notice what I was saying about the triplex thing. You have two families per every three every triplex that are paying for a resource that they're not using, and that
Hmm.
is inherently unfair.
Hmm. Well, that argument on a municipal level can extend to several different things, not just parking spots. It also applies to
Absolutely,
water, right? Like how
absolutely.
some people have pools, and the person who doesn't have a pool, in a sense, is subsidizing um, the water distribution system for the person who does own a pool, right?
Hmm.
Correct. There's a water taxes in some areas. I know Longueuil has a water
And
tax
we
and
don't
so on
have
and
a
so
water
forth.
tax in City Montreal. We're supposed to have one, but if you remember during the Tremblay years with Tony Artuzo, was it Tony Artuzo? Am I pronouncing that right? There was a water meter contract, and it
Oh,
got
yeah,
fishy, got stinky.
that's true. You're
lots
right.
lots
You're
of
correct.
brown envelopes and socks. I don't know if that. Wait, I should qualify that. I don't know if the brown envelopes and socks were directly related to the the water meter contract, but there was
Right.
definitely some brown envelopes and socks during the Trombley administration. Yes, go on. I'm
It was
sorry.
fishy water.
That's
That
right.
being that
Very
being
fishy.
said, what you're conveying to us is just inherently the way the system, and that's even. But what about like apartment buildings then, right? Because that's even more people packed in with even less spaces available in front. And I can assure you of one thing: it took me 3 months to get a parking spot in my apartment building, and I was lucky that it only took 3 months to get an apartment. Because like a lot of us got cars and a lot of us park on the street, so like I assume that depending, like there's parts of towns like the plateau where like it's got to be even astronomically worse because everything's so narrow, there's so many people, there's a lot of buildings, and I don't know if you've noticed how bad parking is out there because there's also a lot of business that it's it
Correct. Well,
creates a
Plateau are lucky because they have the highest level, or I'm not sure if they have the highest right now. It's maybe shifted to Griffintown or somewhere else, but like usually Plateau, Rosemont, those core areas have the highest amount of people who take transit or walk or bike to work. So their mode share, we call that mode share, is non-car. So that allows the Plateau some room to be a very dense neighborhood. Uh, but they still need a vignette system to kind of, and again, what I was saying earlier, the vignette system hardly even pays, like it would take 20 years of vignette and it would have to be adjusted for inflation just to pay for the land value. So the vignette is not a revenue generating operation. It's a loss. The parking is a loss of potential revenue if you want to see it that way. Um, but it's just used to manage the parking in the same way that parking tickets are used to manage to park the parking and make it more livable.
right.
I see the vignette system as a way of the city kind of like prioritizing residents for street parking more than anything else,
Exactly.
right? But
Exactly.
I got to ask you a question though, because it's come up several times in this conversation already. You know, you have the question of the efficiency of the urban efficiency construction of a city, and you're saying that the less space that we devote towards the transportation, the more efficient the city can become. But my
Correct.
question is this: Plateau, right, and Rosemont, these are older neighborhoods. I've worked in the Plateau, right? And I've worked in houses there that, you can still, like in the basement, you're pulling out horse harnesses and horseshoes. They had horses. It's built to the age of the horses, right? It wasn't built around the automobile. And the question I have for you is that, for example, a neighborhood like NDG, which was built around the automobile, is different, right?
Correct.
It was built up in the 30s and the 40s. Now, the question I have is, are those neighborhoods like NEG stuck in that older model now because they've been built up? They don't have the same type of like they call it like they talk about this in urban planning all the time, densification, right? The more dense the neighborhood is, right, the more people you have, the more efficient or effective it is to transport people using public transportation or common communal transportation modes, right? What do you say to a neighborhood like NEG? Are we stuck now in that car mode now because we were just built that way? Is that going to be indefinite?
So this is an interesting question. I'm gonna put it in context of history, okay? And I'll give you a little bit of vocabulary. So there's a concept called Marchetti's wall, okay?
Hmm.
Um, which was discovered not by Marchetti, by a guy named Zahavi, but Marchetti is the one who officialized it. Marchetti's wall is basically what you call an anthropic invariant phenomenon. Anthropic invariant means that no matter what country, no matter where you go, most human beings apply to this rule, regardless of their culture or how they are. And that principle is that our tolerance for transportation in a day is about an hour.
Right.
So if you're above like a 30-minute, an hour means 30-minute there, 30-minute back. If you're
Right.
traveling more than that per day,
Mhm.
it starts to be an irritation. All right.
Right.
So you have cities that are wildly inefficient, like Los Angeles, where people are, or the Bay Area, which is weird shape, are wildly inefficient, and people are way past Marchetti's wall. They're, commuting for 2 hours sometimes per day, it's really, really irritant. So Marchetti cities were always built according to this principle. So something that's pretty interesting, for example, is the city of ancient Rome was built around walking, and the actual size of the city was about as big as Drummondville, but it had a million and I don't quote me exactly, but 1 point something million people living in something as big as Drummondville, because that size is exactly the time it takes to walk half an hour from the center to the exterior, right? And then cities evolved, and they were next built not around the horse. So the horse is interesting, but the horse was always more of commercial transportation. People didn't really have, like, we see cowboys and stuff, that's different, but in cities people didn't really have their horse unless they were a merchant. So we built our cities around the tramway system, actually. So most of Montreal is a tramway level city, with the exception of Old Montreal, which is more of a pedestrian based city. So you're correct. NDG is kind of in a transition period. NDG still has the urban fabric of a tramway suburb,
Mhm. There's still the
but it,
tracks in NEG. They're there.
yeah.
You
So
see them sometimes.
there are some interesting things about NDG. For example, there's large lateral margins on a lot of the houses around the Terrebonne area. Most of the houses, they could be duplexes, but they're
Could you
large
define
single
that
family.
lateral? I don't understand what you mean by that.
Oh, sorry. So lateral margins is the space between two buildings.
Okay, got it.
Then you have front margins, which is the space between the building and the street.
Got it.
Can also be a wild inefficiency. Like in the suburbs, they have large, useless front margins that serve no other purpose than to be decorative and have a patch of grass.
Right.
Um,
They call that curbside appeal, by the way.
Curbside appeal, that's correct. So a small margin can be fun. It gives a little area, like 1.5 meters, gives you a little bit of privacy between your house and the street. You
Mhm.
don't want passerbys to be looking in your window. That makes sense. Allows you to plant a couple trees, so on and so forth. But long story short, so NDG, it's mostly um, the semi-attached
That's
housing,
correct.
right?
Yeah, it's correct.
So that could actually be converted easily back and forth to like duplex, triplex. So there's room for densification, for example, in NDG.
Hmm.
Same thing with Toronto. Most of Toronto is single family homes, fully detached,
Mm.
that could theoretically be kind of retro fitted into triplexes, but it's a little bit complicated because the stairways are
Hmm.
inside
Hmm.
and there's, structural wall issues.
Well,
Whereas
that makes a lot of sense because what you're seeing, I actually look at the data, and what I'm seeing from the demographic data is that if you look at the city of Montreal and they have number of households and population, and what you're seeing in the demographic data is that the number of people per household is going down, right?
correct.
So maybe the older housing stock we have is just too big to accommodate today's needs, right? So if we could get in one of these houses and then convert it into multiple units, that could make a lot of sense, right?
Correct. What we're seeing, like say in my neighborhood in Point Saint Charles, has gotten so expensive here.
Mm-hmm.
Again, and this is a myth. People think it's because the neighborhood became cool. No, it's just because it's close to downtown,
Mm-hmm.
and our city has become like cities are like a circle, right? You have a point and it expands. And as cities expand, the radial network, the roads to get
Mm-hmm.
to the center, it becomes more and more expensive because you have to keep branching them out to get to the center. So we hit this wall, this Marchetti's wall. The suburbs hit the Marchetti's wall that I was mentioning before. Boom. And now it's becoming so expensive to bring people from the suburb to the center of the city. There's way too much congestion. Building highways is too expensive. We just built the REM, which is going to be a good solution. But yeah, so because we hit that Marchetti's wall, that's why the prices are going up in Montreal, especially in Paris Central neighborhoods like Pointe Saint Charles and DG, because we're close to downtown. We're close. The trade-off again between land area and proximity to employment. That in turn makes the neighborhood more attractive and cuter and so on and so forth. So in Pointe Saint Charles, you'll see a lot of duplexes that are being converted to single family homes now. So the population density is actually going down, but the built form has not changed.
Yeah, but saying that, Point St. Charles, right, has a lot going for itself in the sense that not only is it centrally located, but it has easy access to Lachine Canal, which is owned by the Canadian government, right? And this is like
Right.
a linear park that basically connects Place Saint Henri to downtown, right? And so there's also the questions, right, of the whole idea of the 15-minute city, which I'm sure you're familiar with that concept, right? So this is the new kind of model in which cities are kind of aspiring to. This is what I see, and but what's bizarre about that model, the 15-minute city, it's really at odds with the older, vision of the city where you had this city central, where you had all the major investments made in infrastructure like entertainment venues and all that kind of stuff. And the idea was that everybody would come into the central city to consume or use those facilities. And now, because of a variety of different factors, that is no longer the prevailing mindset. Now it's distributed. You have like these community hubs. Is this what I'm saying? Does this make sense to you, or am I talking hogwash?
That's very interesting what you're saying, and I agree with you. I just want to quickly bounce on one thing with the Lachine Canal. You're correct that the Lachine Canal, it's rehabilitation, I guess, by Parks Canada,
Mhm.
definitely jump started this area.
Right,
But we also have the linear park facing the Fleuve Saint Laurent, where Nuns Island is and all that.
right,
That's been a park for a long time too.
right.
So the Parks Canada operation definitely did jumpstart the value,
Mhm.
but it just kind of kicked something that was already in motion, if that makes sense.
Right, absolutely. The wall makes a lot of sense to me. I get it. Because I used to do that. I used to commute into town. I had to take an hour bus ride. I lived in the West Island to get into town to go to school. And I had to take an hour bus ride to get back home. I spent 2 hours of my day in public transportation. And when I finished high school, I said to myself, I said, never, never, ever again am I going to put
Mm.
myself in a life position where I'm spending 10 hours of my life per week just getting places. It's not efficient. I get it 100%.
So to come back to the 15-minute cities, this is
Mm,
a good question, and it all depends on demographic directions. Okay. So if your population is increasing, as it is increasing very fast in Canada, especially lately, it's been flying.
mm,
Just to give you a interesting statistic, the when we look at a city, you have to look at it as one giant entity, a metropolitan region, and that's defined by the amount of people who commute downtown. So to be a Met region in Statistic Canada, you have to have any territory where half the population or more commutes to the downtown area will be in the Met region of that area.
Mhm.
So all your dynamics, transportation, housing, and all that is defined by the Met region. So for example, just to bring back the road network thing in Montreal. So I was saying, yeah, you know, the triplex, half are paying, but actually a lot of the road network is used. Most of our traffic congestion is caused by the suburbs. At all where you see all the worst traffic, it's where the bridges are, right?
Right.
That's suburban
Facts.
commute.
So all those people that moved to Laval over COVID and now work
Those
from home ended,
Laval
so they have to
people.
come back. No, because they all left because of work from home. It was a giant percentage of it. There were articles for days about this phenomenon. I'm sure the South Shore too is there, but that's what's making the 15. It's that stretch between the 15 to the 40 to the 15 that is the absolute worst for like half the day, because this giant amount of people are now coming in from Laval and there's no other way for them to do it.
Yeah, but don't the bridges also act as choke points? Because
Yeah,
when you
that makes
cross
it
a river,
make it
right,
worse.
it makes it worse, right?
Yeah. If you look, like a really good example is Pont Jacques Cartier. On one side is a giant spaghetti interchange, and on the other side, it's like you just hop off right onto Delormier. You're like right into the urban fabric.
Right,
So how and it's a bridge, right? So exactly 100% of people on the that are on one side leave on the other side or come in, right?
right.
So how come you have this giant spaghetti interchange on one side to manage traffic,
Mhm.
but on the other side you don't? Well, it's because the urban fabric was always already there. So what happens is that generates traffic all the way up like Sherbrooke Street forever, because you have the traffic flow that a spaghetti interchange needs to manage that's just dumped into the residential road
Good
network.
point. Yeah.
And
And
so
and
points.
and you don't like that, right? You see that as kind of like bad for Montreal that all this traffic's being dumped on our streets in the urban fabric.
So it's something we need to manage, but I wouldn't say it's inherently, I wouldn't make a moral judgment on it saying it's bad or good.
I like this guy.
Because
He's
again,
a
the
he's a
Marche
scientific guy. It's about the data, the numbers to him. Go on, I'm listening. I like this. Go ahead, sir.
it comes back to the Marchetti wall principle and the
Right,
Alonzo Mills model that I was talking about, density gradients, right?
right.
It's normal. So, okay, I'm going to tie in the 15-minute city here with this one. Again, cities are usually a circle or a half circle because there's a river or something, right? But there's usually a point of origin that spreads.
Hmm.
It's it's absolutely logical for companies to try to locate in the most central point because that reduces their distance to the employment market. If my company is in the middle, I can hire anybody from here, anywhere in that circle, and those people will only need to go half an hour. If I locate on the corner of the city, the edge, the suburbs, for example, well, the people on the other side, if I'm in Longueuil, then people in Laval, it's harder for them to get to me, right?
Got it.
But we are seeing what we call polycentric cities now. Cities, the metropolitan regions have become so large that slowly it's becoming feasible to create these little pockets of like these little sub centers.
Like Brossard.
And that's normal. As cities grow beyond the Marchetti wall that I was saying, beyond that half an hour commute distance, either you densify like crazy, either you invest like crazy in transit, or either these sub centers will emerge.
So
Now,
it's
the
like
fifth,
it's like uptown and downtown and that kind of stuff, right?
yeah, exactly,
Toronto
exactly.
has
But
that. They
like
have they
you can
have
kind
like
of like, I think Brossard is a really good example of what you're describing right now, because like the people who all moved to Longueuil didn't necessarily want to come downtown, so now you got people who have crazy popping restaurants in the downtown Griffintown area opening up their new offshoots in Brossard because there is this clientele of people who want to be out there. It's to the point where dead ass, I'll take people from Saint Laurent to Brossard to go party because it's really turned into that type of an area. It's just far enough away from downtown. Like, whereas Longueuil is just across the bridge, Brossard's across the wrong bridge and not actually that convenient to get to, so it needed its own version of stuff. And it really, like, look at Distrant, like it's got everything you could need in life.
So this is interesting because the whole like Solar Uniquartier, which is around the Brossard, not the Brossard station, but the Distrant station, the REM station, that just emerged like like a little downtown. And the Distrant, you have pretty much everything you need there too. And the reason why the land value was high enough to have that sprout up and look like a mini downtown is because you have to consider that it's not distance, but time that is the determinant in this balance, this gradient of density. So because there's a REM station that basically allows you to teleport from the edge, the agricultural edge of the metropolitan region to downtown in less than 10 minutes, I think, then all of a sudden it's the equivalent of being in Point Saint Charles or in NDG, where you're like a 10-minute metro ride away
Right.
from them, right? So it's like a little Mario Bros teleportation tunnel that allows that to sprout up.
Thank you for the cultural
Interesting.
reference there, buddy.
So coming back to this 15 minutes city idea is the idea of these hyper like decentralized localities, which I think makes a lot of sense if you're talking about just general services. I think it makes a lot of sense that we all want uh, elementary schools 15 minutes distance away so our kids can maybe even bike there, or we could easily bring them when we're going to work. We want daycares close. We want you know, fish shops and butcher shops and bread shops and all that stuff that we used to have. The depanneurs that we have used to all be like these little mini grocery stores, butcher shops, fish shops, fruit shops, da, 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 da. So we used to have that. 15-minute city used to be what we had. But 15-minute city, when you enter employment in the equation, it it's not really possible. And I don't think it should be a planning objective because of this Marchetti Wall principle and the fact that a metropolitan region will always be the distance people will tolerate to drive to a downtown employment area. It means that no matter how forcibly you try to create these 15-minute cities, like people will, because Marchetti's wall is not at 15 minutes, but it's at an hour, people will naturally locate farther, like no matter how hard you try. And if you try to enforce decentralizing employment, you're actually going to hurt your city. You should just maybe let employers decide what is the best interest for them, where they want to locate, and try to
Hmm.
kind of foster that instead of enforcing it. So a lot of the idea of the 15-minute cities, I think, is a bit of a misconception on like the general economic dynamics of what makes a city exist. This tension between floor space and proximity to employment, which will always tend to go to like 35 minutes, 45-minute drives. That'll be the max. That's where your city stops. And if you add transportation infrastructure, your city will spread more. But if we see 15-minute cities more of as an amenities thing, like I want all the amenities to be 15 minutes away, but I don't mind if my employment's half an hour away or maybe 35 minutes away, that'll make sense. And by the way, the Marchetti's wall thing, just to be clear, it's just a general fuzzy standard. Like the average, the mean is that 1 hour, but people will tolerate more or less, right?
I'm certain
Fair
that
enough.
if your salary is 120,000 a year, you'll tolerate a little more traveling than if it's $50,000 a year.
Correct. Well, actually, what's important, interesting here is the more your as your salary gets gradually higher, you might tolerate a little bit more distance. But there's a point where your opportunity cost becomes so high that if you consider like, I don't know how much hourly salary is $120,000, but like say your average salary, your hourly salary is $50. So if you have to travel more than 1 hour in your day, that's $50 right off the bat you lost out of your pocket every day in terms of opportunity cost. I could have been working instead of being in the bus, for example, or whatever, in my car. So when higher salaries eventually become super intolerant of distances, and extremely high salaries are very, very, very intolerant of high distance. Like Jeff Bezos does not want to be in traffic. Elon Musk does not want to be in traffic. So they will usually locate extremely close to downtowns. And that's why you have luxury high-rise phenomenon. That's why you have the Westmount phenomenon. That's why you have the Toronto Portlands phenomenon. You know, that's rich people don't want to be in traffic.
So
That's facts.
if
Actually,
I
there's all these crazy houses just above the mountain on Coast St. Catherine that are like tucked away, where like crazy wealthy people are literally a 5 minute drive from downtown.
so
Yeah.
to redirect the conversation back, if I may be so bold, to
Run it.
redirect the conversation on NDG. Like we discussed earlier in the program about, some of the dynamics that, exist in NEG. And I like the way you responded back that there is opportunities for increased intensification in NEG. Well, I guess my big question is looking at NEG and our current, road network and how we're set up. And, we've had the Terrebonne bike path now be implemented. It's just, been implemented recently. You know, in your mind, because I think the end game for everybody is we want NEG be a better place to live, right? So that's the end game, right? So let's not get into the minutia right now. In your mind, seeing us in our community and based on your background, what do we need to do as a community to be a better place to live in NEG, right? Not saying that we're already awesome, but how do we get to more awesome, right?
So here's the thing. I could tell you my opinion, but
Please.
again, urban planning is an act of power. It's a thing of a choice making thing, right? So
Right.
what's a good neighborhood for one person may not be for the other.
Got
And I
it. So
think
what's your
it's
opinion?
absolute yeah. Well, I think if normally we all pursue our personal interests,
Right, fair enough.
um, my personal opinion is I think if the global population continues to have this massive rural exodus. People don't want to live in the poverty of the rural areas of third world countries. They're moving to cities,
Right.
which means people in other countries, the people in the city are also feeling that pressure. So they're trying to move up and come to Canada, or other places. The Canadian population thus is increasing. um the birth rates and everything. So our populations are increasing. Our cities are remain very desirable places despite the phenomenon of remote work, which may change the dynamics a bit. So
Mhm,
my opinion today may be different in 10 years.
mhm.
But I don't think it will change the dynamic that much. I really don't think it'll change more than, 5-10% of how our cities are done. Um, we have to manage this increasing population and the trade-off between preserving our heritage, the environment, and housing costs. And those three are like kind of mutually exclusive, but if you plan well, you could line them up. All right. So I'll give you an example. Tokyo is a absolutely paramount model of extreme efficiency in city building. They're not too gung ho on preservation and heritage. You can basically destroy buildings and rebuild. So it's a very flexible city. They have no on-street parking. If you own a car there, and a lot of people own cars in Tokyo, by the way, you have to prove that you have the parking space on your own land. So if you don't own a parking space, you can't have a car, because there is no public uh, parking. So the street network is extremely efficiently designed. Everything is because of that. It's a high density, high proximity city that is flexible and adapts with the changes.
Mhm.
So, if some place becomes if the housing pressure goes up, they build. So that keeps the housing pressure down. The trade-off to that, some people may say Tokyo, the people in Japan are super unhappy. I don't know how much culture plays into it, but in terms of a city building, they have 15-minute cities on lock. You can just go by foot anywhere in Tokyo, and you go to work, you take the metro. Um, Extremely efficient, extremely flexible, extremely adaptable. The trade-off to that is there's less space. People live in smaller spaces. In some cases, it can be very extreme. The trade-off is also that heritage protection is kind of flushed down the drain. So, for example, if NDG became like NDG is already expensive, right? So what you'd have to do is just build more housing. So build more housing. You can chop single family homes and make them duplexes, but that only goes so far. But if you start building a bunch of towers everywhere, or you upzone to 8 stories high and then it becomes Barcelona level density, yeah, that'll solve the housing crisis in a minute. But you're losing your heritage buildings, right? So that's a trade-off we have to make. My personal opinion is very utilitarian, and I'm like, we're faced with housing crisis, climate crisis, and population increase in city crisis, which is feeding the housing crisis.
Mm.
And the only answer to that is to be flexible, to be adaptable, to densify, and to use our resources more efficiently. Um, so I'm painting a really big picture here. What applies to NDG? I don't know. Is I don't think sacrificing all the build form of NDG and immediately upzoning it to Barcelona level density would really do anything anyways. It would slowly, incrementally, people would maybe knock down a building here or there and it would slowly build up. That could be interesting. But there's some sacrifices that would be made. Some interesting buildings would be knocked down to build ugly glass whatever's, right? Um, so I don't think I can answer your question in in a short period of
But
time.
I have a curveball for you though.
Yeah.
The curveball is that NEG is not at its peak population. We've actually had a population decrease in the Borough City NEG. We were sitting at like 180,000 people back in the 60s and 70s. We dipped down to about like 165, 160, and now we're creeping back up to 170. And if you look at the population growth of Montreal, the population growth isn't really growing that significantly. It's kind of like, I would
Oh, it
say
is.
it's
You have to look at it at the metropolitan scale. So that's
mhm,
the mistake of looking things as neighborhoods.
right.
The economic ecosystem is metropolitan. So
Hmm.
if you put housing pressure in one place, it'll pop up somewhere else, right?
I see.
Like a whack-a-mole, right? So
Hmm.
for the Met region of Montreal, there's 30,000 new people per year. And to put a context to that, that's the population of Chambly. So there's a new Chambly in the Met region every year.
Hmm.
So either that's urban sprawl or it's densification. There's only
Hmm.
two answers to that question.
Right.
So why is the population decreasing in NDG? There could be a number of reasons. Um, Kids leaving their homes, but
Hmm.
the boomers keeping that single family home. So it's like an empty nester phenomenon, right? That
Hmm.
could be one reason.
Hmm.
Another reason could be like in my neighborhood, people are converting duplexes to single family because
Hmm.
it's richer families. So
There's
if
also
the
been a lot of renovictions in NDG, to be honest. So you don't see that as much with the houses, but there's entire blocks of buildings that were vacated because they were low rent.
Mhm.
That's like eight units per building, multiple buildings per street. Anyway, that kind of stuff also had been happening at least up until around COVID. I don't know. I haven't followed it so much since then.
So exactly. But if you look at this context of 30,000 new people in the metropolitan region, where are they going?
I just checked it up. You're right. It's going up. The metropolitan area of Montreal, the population is increasing about 30,000 people a year. That's correct.
Yeah, that's a little bit, it's sometimes a little higher, sometimes
Yes,
during
that's right.
COVID it was lower.
Yeah.
Um, that's a lot of people. So
Hmm.
what's happening in NDG, the microcosm of NDG is
Right.
linked to the macrocosm. So when I'm saying like upzone NDG like crazy, I'm not advocating for that, by the way. I'm just saying like this is maybe one choice that could be
No,
made.
I hear you. I'm not holding you to anything.
So that would, if you, for example, if tomorrow, this is never going to happen, by the way, whether you
Mm,
upzone it or not, but say, for example, it's a hypothetical situation, the
mm,
city says we upzone DG to 8 stories high.
mm,
So now all of a sudden you add a second DG on top of NDG. Boom, you
mm,
just added that. So
mm.
I don't know what the population of NDG is there, but you just solved the housing crisis. You just added like those 30,000 new people for like the next 3 or 4 years can all now live in NDG.
It's
Boom.
170,000 people in CDNEG. About 60,000 of those live in. They say about 65,000 live in NEG. So
Okay.
that's what the numbers say. Yeah.
So if you double the amount of store of floor space on NDG, everybody
Right.
can build 2, 3 more stories.
Yeah.
You've basically
Just don't
absorbed.
want Holden living on top of me, okay? My only condition.
So you've absorbed 3 years worth of metropolitan growth in one neighborhood. Like you would
Right.
never want to do that. I'm just
Right.
giving you
Right,
a
right, I
hype.
get it. I get
Right,
it.
because I mean, even this whole solution comes at the cost of like everybody sacrificing what they have now, and a lot of people, I think, when they want to solve the housing crisis in their mind, they're not thinking I want to get a 3.5 or a studio. They're thinking we need to have access to houses. So I don't know if this solves the housing crisis the way people perceive it. It just might solve the housing crisis at a very literal or technical level.
Yeah, but I think I gotta jump in again, and I just you know, one of the reasons why we asked you to be on the show there, Morse Attack, and I gotta tell you, you know, we could do another show on you. Like, this is a
Yeah, no,
really interesting conversation.
you're a
This is
wonderful
awesome.
guest.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I want to refocus on the Terrebonne bike path. Okay.
Yeah,
So
for
let's
sure.
talk about
Also,
that from
we
just a
we
technical.
also so I fulfill a promise because we've had our best viewership that we've had in quite some time, and I know part of
Right.
it was people want to hear about the data collection, and you were telling me about the cluster data in the park, so I sold the episode a bit on how we collect data for bike paths and how it gets reported to the news.
Right.
So we
Okay.
definitely
Oh, yeah.
have to touch on
You
that
can-
too
All
in
right.
this.
All right.
I can
We
show you the
will.
graphs and everything if we want.
Okay, but
We
let's
could actually, so we could
let's just stay focused on
We'll,
the Terrebonne.
we'll do
Okay.
we'll
Yeah,
do both
yeah.
before we're done.
Okay.
Is all I'm
First,
saying.
so Terrebonne bike path, right? In your view, because you know you're clearly have this macro perspective on development, space, right, housing, the infrastructure for displacing people. How does, in your mind, how does a bike path like Terrebonne, how does that benefit the situation, or how does that is that negative or a positive thing in your mind? Like, could you speak to that to us?
So I don't know the details
Right.
of that
I'm
bike path.
talking generally
I know
speaking
general
in
speaking.
terms of a bike
Um,
path through a residential urban environment like NDG. Talk to us about
right.
that.
Okay, so it depends on our priorities. So for example, we established earlier that that bike path links Concordia,
Hmm.
and there's
We
two
established this off
elementary
cam, by the
schools.
way. This wasn't done on camera. I digress.
Right. So for the people that were not there, we established that we have two elementary schools and a major university on that bike path, correct?
Yeah, we have a
Now,
special needs school as well. We've got a church. Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead. Yes.
so I remember hanging out in front of Williamsburg School. What is it called?
Oh, it's on Terrebonne. Ah, what is it called again?
Wilmington.
I'm embarrassed.
So I was sitting by Wilmington, and I remember I was there's a little park, there's a bench, and I was eating my lunch because I was going up the street, and I decided to stop. And right when I sat down, maybe 2 minutes later, it was the bells rang, and all these kids started leaving the school, and I was really shocked by the amount of these kids that were leaving with like their bikes and so on and so forth, and their little kids. And at that time, there was no bike path. And I was like, whoa, what's going on? Like, this is so dangerous. There's cars coming through and everything. And there was a lot of these kids with their bikes. So maybe that bike path is only serving the purpose of like very small traffic flows. Like uh the Vendôme Maisonneuve bike counter has a 2,000 bikes per day peak. All right. So the highest peak is 2,000 bikes per day. So my best guess for like that bike path that you have there, there's no counter on it, but it's definitely lower than that.
Right.
So its peak is maybe, I don't know, let's cut it by half just to be safe.
Can you
Say a
clarify what
thousand,
you mean by peak, like in terms of like, how that, like,
like the maximum amount of ridership you're going to get at the highest peak of the year, about 1,000 bikes a day, for example, right?
Yeah.
Maybe it's lower.
I
Maybe
think
it's
that's fair. Yeah, I can see that. Yeah.
but that wouldn't be
Expect
reflective of the average. That would just be like,
that peak.
right. So when we look at bike path data, actually we can separate it. We have a seasonal curve like this, sine wave, and then we have the week does little curves like this, right?
Hmm.
So like weekend traffic is lower, than weekday traffic, and obviously summer traffic is a lot higher. So most bike paths in the winter, like in the low season, they're not doing more than 100, 200 passages per day.
Mhm.
And the highest bike paths in Montreal are doing like something like 20. I'm not going to say a number that I don't know for sure. So, but
Right. Fair
it's
enough.
in the multiple thousands. Some of them I
Right.
hit higher than 10,000
Mhm.
passages. But anyways, long story short, so let's say there's about 1,000 bikes going there per day. So that's kind of a lot of volume. Obviously, people like if they go once, they might be coming back twice. So you never really know like what the like that count could be. People counted twice if it's a major corridor for people going to work. Um,
So
but
that just counts anytime a cyclist goes by. So like if you have like a Uber Eats driver and he goes up and down the street like 30 times a day, he would be included.
it'll be counted
I
30
say
times.
that because us Uber drivers literally might take Saint Denis and I might pass that counter 15 times in one shift.
Absolutely. Actually, one thing that I can say, because this is an interesting point, Uber drivers, there's a lot of Uber and DoorDash that is using the bike networks now, and that's kind of changing the dynamics. But the like overall volumes haven't really moved in 10 years on most bike sensors, to be honest with you.
Okay.
There's not even
So
like a
you're saying like the delivery people, even if they're a newer phenomenon, so if they were going to be a variable, we'd see it in the data.
yeah, like you don't really see them like, oh, here's the Uber bump, you know? So they're there, but they're too diluted in the general trends. So long story short, there's 1,000 bikes going there per day. What does that mean? Like, does that mean there's so let's take that 1,000 bikes, cut it in half, people going back and forth. So that's 500 cyclists. So if there's 500 cyclists, what does that mean in terms of saved parking? How many of those cyclists would have took their car to work and have now freed up a parking space for someone else? So
Mhm.
that's one variable you can consider. Um, Even if it's lower than that, even if it's, you know, I don't know, 100 bikes a day, but those 100 bikes are those two elementary schools and those kids using that bike path to go home. Is that a goal that people would want to pursue, like protect the children? You know what I mean?
Mhm.
So there's different goals that you can pursue, and you have to also see these bike paths in the bigger picture. So obviously, for the people living on that bike path, so I know it's not a street like this; it's like a transit street, but
Mhm.
they do have the way les îlots is the blocks, the way the blocks are done in that area. I do think there's houses facing the cross streets. Am I correct? So like you have the
Are they
block, you
facing the Strokes cross streets?
But
There's houses along Terrebonne and there's houses along the side streets. So does that
that's it.
does that answer your question?
Yes, exactly. So there is housing along Terrebonne, right?
Yes, there is. Yes.
But the housing is the end of the block, correct? So there may be like two houses on that end that are facing like this, so their parking is in front, and then
Right.
there may be two facing like this, so their parking is here on
Perhaps.
Terrebonne.
I can't.
That
I
makes
can't.
sense?
I can't. Yeah, it makes sense, but I can't confirm that. No.
Okay.
I can check that really quick on Google Maps.
Look
Right.
on the map, but I'm pretty sure that's what the
And what's the significance of that?
so the significance is that you do have people that have to park on that street,
Hmm.
but there may be less a smaller parking
Actually,
needs
yeah,
per
no,
square.
he's correct. So, like, let's take the corner of Marriott, right? The first house, the house that's on the corner of Marriott and Terrebonne it has, like, housing facing Marriott. So the parking spaces and stuff would technically be on Marriott, even though it shares the corner of Terrebonne. Then there's, like, a little alley backyard area, and then there's only 3 houses before with parking on facing Terrebonne, with the last one on the block facing Rosedale with the house address out onto Rosedale. So it means that even if there's 5 houses on Terrebonne, only 3 of these houses actually contribute to parking on Terrebonne, as opposed to all 5 units, meaning the space distribution in the way, if we were thinking about his triplex example, is kind of the mathing is different on Terrebonne towards a Rosedale Street.
Exactly. So there's because you have two side walls instead of front door walls, it's like as if you have two like free parking spaces for every block, right? Because it's like, does that make sense, right?
Yeah, so
This is assuming these are
you're
all
suggesting then you're through this you're suggesting there's less pressure on parking on Terrebonne because of this. And then
exactly
what
that.
you were also suggesting is that if people are taking their bikes instead of parking on Terrebonne, that frees up more parking for the residents. So if they take a couple parking spots away for the bike path, its impact could be negligible. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, exactly. So I haven't done traffic study. I'm really
Right.
throwing guess numbers
No, but
out here with
you're giving everybody food for thought. You're trying to you're telling us the process, things that we have to look at to come to a conclusion. But the other question I have for you is, you know, when I was young, we all took our bikes to school, right? Elementary school. Well, like I'm Gen X, right? We all took our bikes to school, and what I've noticed, is that people now uh, there's been a habit of people driving their kids to school by car, and they're not walking like they used to. And I feel that in a sense that becomes sort of a vicious cycle. What happens is that people start bringing their kids to school, excuse me, in their car. Then the other parents don't feel safe because lots of cars, so they start bringing their kid to school in car. Is this something that's discussed among urban planning circles?
absolutely.
Yeah,
What you just named is called retroaction loops.
right,
And car orientation in cities is by far the strongest action loop you can have, right?
right.
Because just the simple mathematics of it, right?
Mm,
If every store needs a parking space for its clients,
mm,
that means there's more parking space. That means the stores are more distance one to the other,
mm,
right?
right.
And so if you just add one parking space between each building,
Mm,
right? Boom,
mm,
you've
mm,
doubled the amount of linear meters there is for each street. So you've
right,
just doubled the amount of time it takes to get anywhere just
right.
by adding a parking space everywhere.
And forget
So
about
you
walking anywhere, right? Because now, before you could walk, but now you got to take your car because it's too far, right?
exactly, and
It's
as
like
you do,
the big parking lots, Walmarts and the whatever the case may be, right?
that's exactly it. So I think we do need there is an efficiency issue. Like I'm definitely never gonna say like we to ban cars or get rid of cars or stuff like that. Maybe downtown areas they can be car-free zones. That's fine.
Mm,
But in terms of efficiency, if you just get rid of all cars and everybody was on public transportation,
mm,
between the buses, there'd be large gaps that are of unused road space, right? So to
right.
bring back to my earlier argument about efficiency of road space,
Mm,
cars can be extremely efficient in road space if you have a strong public transit network and you just use those cars to kind of fill in the gaps between. And if
mm,
Well,
if 30% of your city population is commuting by car, that's perfectly reasonable. If it's 100%, then there's a big problem in terms of your efficiency.
mm-hmm.
So yeah, absolutely.
What's the soft spot? Where is the soft spot?
There is no good answer because, and this is why, like you've been asking
well,
these
there's also
questions about
like,
this, and,
there's
and it's
also
hard
just
for
to
me
It's
not
fair.
remember,
But I have to
but just
ask the
to throw
question.
another
Come on.
like factor into the sending kids to school, right? As of the 80s, we've had this whole stranger danger phenomenon where you become a negligent parent sending your 8-year-old into an urban scenario by yourself with the fear of unmarked vans kidnapping your kids and such. So, like when
This
you went to
candy.
100%.
school,
Come.
when you went to school when you were young, that wasn't a thing, right? Like, I mean, it might have been, but it wasn't exactly the same thing as it is now. Plus, people, I think, kind of live maybe a bit farther from their schools. I don't know how close we are to them. I know there's zonings and things like that, but it's not always feasible to just send an 8-year-old off on a bicycle by themselves to school in the middle of NDG right now for social reasons beyond urban and city planning, because parents spy on each other and go to Facebook groups like Thrive NDG and tell on the negligence of other people. Like, there's more to that conversation.
I
Okay.
wholeheartedly agree with you. And that's actually interesting because
Here we
it's
go.
interesting for a few reasons. The first reason, because you said 8-year-old, an
Yeah,
8-year-old
because I
is
feel like 10
actually
and above, it's questionable,
the
maybe.
8-year-old is actually the socially acceptable age in Japan. So I was talking about the efficiency of Tokyo. 8-year-old is like when kids are old enough to take the metro alone. So just think of that in a huge metropolis of, I think there's like 30 million people or something. So there's a social aspect. The stranger danger thing you said is super interesting because it's a very North American phenomenon, and there's not a lot of research on that. So I looked into this at one point when I was doing my bachelor's. It was one of my little projects I had done for one of my classes, was look at the impact of stranger danger on transportation behavior. There's hardly anything on that, but I
Hmm.
think it's something that we all kind of inherently know, right? Like everybody knows it's kind of sus to like send your 8 year old alone in the, you know what I mean? Um, and what you're saying again about the parents judging each other and policing each other is also a very valid point. So there's one of the, I guess you could say she's the patron saint of urban planning, is a lady named Jane Jacobs, who lived in Toronto for a while, but absolutely completely revolutionized urban planning, and kind of had to scale back from the modernist experiments of the 50s and 60s and 70s. And one of her key things was what we call eyes on the street. And this, there's a lot of research on at a certain level of density, especially when you have a lot of shops and places where you can have what you call I forget what she calls them, but like neighborhood managers or something like that, like people that everybody knows that can kind of keep a good eye on the street. And if you have enough people watching the street, they become safe without needing a police presence because there's just so many witnesses to a potential crime. So she has a whole
You're talking about community spirit here. This is what I'm hearing. This is what I'm hearing.
100%.
That's what I'm hearing. Yeah.
And she has a
People
whole
knowing their neighbor, knowing the other neighbors, and they talk to each other,
But it sounds
and
like almost like informal neighborhood watch, like that actual program, Neighborhood Watch.
well, we had that when we was a kid. It was called Block Parents. You remember that?
Yeah,
You
that
guys are
kind
too
of
young
thing.
to know about that
No,
stuff,
I remember
right?
Block Parents.
Yeah, we had Block Parents, right? Maybe we need to
so
bring Block Parents back.
so what you just said is really interesting because neighborhood watch is 100% built on the principle of eyes on the street. So it's 100% influenced by Jane Jacobs. These people read that book and like, we need to organize this. But the beauty of Jane Jacobs' principle is that it's done organically without being forced. And it's just done because of the urban fabric itself naturally supports and sustains this. And by removing streets as a place for people to walk, to live, to be, to hang out, to go into a store and like sit on the corner and eat a sandwich, whatever, whatnot, by removing that and making it a space for cars, we completely destroyed that idea of eyes on the street. And we then had to enforce it artificially with programs like Neighborhood Watch. So not necessarily criticizing the program, but
You're reminding me of something. You're reminding me. I remember back about 10 years ago, there was a gentleman that came to Montreal, and he had a whole presentation called Street Diets, and how a lot about what he was saying about urban planning is that you shouldn't have stores back away from the streets. You should have them right on the street so people who are sitting in the restaurant can see the people on the street and vice versa. It creates sort of like everybody's kind of like seeing them, they see them, and if something's going down, hey, what's going out there? It's like people can make interventions. Whereas
Right.
if the infrastructure is built in such a way that it isolates people from each other, it doesn't help facilitate this spirit. But saying that, Holden, we need to have Mr. Morse Attack. I always got to look at your name because it's not a common name. Back on the show because it's now
Yeah, no.
clocking 7:39, and I think we're asking
Alex
a
gets
lot
real
from our
hungry.
audience right now.
Honestly, Alex, our audience has been the most engaged we've had in forever. We
I
have
see.
the highest
Okay,
number we've had in a minute.
but
Actually, we even have a question for Alex before we
for
go,
me. All right,
specifically from Massey Milano.
all right.
This summer, I noticed the EXO train just stop along the tracks on de Maisonneuve around Grand. I never
Right,
used to see this before, but now I see it all the time. The train just
right,
stops between stops. Train parking in NDG? What's
right.
going on?
Trainman has an embarrassing confession to make. I don't know why. I'll investigate it and get back to you, but don't know why at all. What I can say is that EXO shares the tracks down there with CN and I believe CP as well. And there's a lot of wonky stuff happening because they have to like share that space with the other rail lines. And I know what I can say as well is that we've seen a lot of construction down there. They rehabilitated the Montreal West train station, so maybe that's having an impact. So that's my best non-answer. I apologize for that. Is there another question?
Any other questions? All y'all
No?
watching before we go away?
Yeah, we're gonna have to definitely gonna
But
have
actually,
to have Morse Attack
one
back
more
on the show.
question just about the bike path data. When we see the
Right.
bike path data reported to the news and they talk about the number of people that are using it, how how can do we take that data at face value? Like, what should we know about that data? Because I think that would be one last question before we go.
Okay, I love this question because this is my latest research paper. And I want to be very careful at how I'm going to answer it because I don't want it to be misinterpreted. The bike data that's on the open data source, Montreal's open data source, is a big Excel spreadsheet. And if all you do is take the sum at the bottom of that spreadsheet, you're not going to have the correct statistic. And I can tell you, unfortunately, that's what newspapers do because they don't have time to have people like me sit around
I
and
can
do data
testify that
imputation.
personally, by the way. I don't have
Yeah,
time to do anything anymore.
yeah. So I can, if but to just to leave this question because I don't want to talk too much, but I'll give you a picture because a picture is 1,000 words.
Right.
I'll go back to my document I had out here. So where are you guys at here? Okay, here we are.
We don't see it if we're supposed to.
Okay, here we are. Boom.
Boom.
So these are oh here we go. Okay. So you see these graphs here?
Mm-hmm.
So this, for example, is the Saint-Urbain sensor. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And you see these lines in red?
Mm-hmm.
These lines in red is data that I imputated with an algorithm that basically decomposes seasonal and weekly trends and then kind of finds missing value based on past data. So as you can see here, it's basically filling this one, it's putting this one between these two. You see how that kind of lines up? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So the Montreal bike data has tons of gaps like that, first of all. So there's tons of undercounting.
Right.
Before I stuck my nose in this data, there was a whole bunch of timestamp errors. Also, you have to consider that every time they add a bike counter, it's gonna add data. So it's not like it's counting bikes that are in existence, but it may be misleading if you're doing a statistic like talking about an increase in cycling. Because if you have so in 2019, I think the bike counters almost doubled. There used to be like 20, and now there's close to 40.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously that's going to make your bike count data skyrocket.
Mm-hmm.
So if you see in La Presse, they're talking about bike counts went up by 50% or something like that. That's complete bullshit.
Mm-hmm.
It's that they're just now counting bikes that they weren't counting before.
Mm-hmm.
If you're looking at raw numbers, that can be interesting because if you say, for example, the Rev has the Rev is the Saint Denis bike path there, the new bike highway. If you want, if they're saying there's 100,000 10,000 passages per day in the high season, well, that's a raw number and it makes sense. So you just have to be careful at what statistic is being said. And it's not, I don't want to blame the newspapers. It's not their fault. They're like taking these gigantic Excel spreadsheets and just doing sums at the bottom.
They don't have time. They just don't have
They don't
time
have
anymore.
time.
That's
And it's
it.
perfectly normal. And the city of Montreal is not cleaning the data because doing what I'm doing right here, doing an imputation is like I'm technically inventing those numbers with an algorithm. I'm very confident that that's pretty much approximate. But the city of Montreal, I think their policy is like, we're not going to do data imputation because if we don't have the data, we don't have it. Either that or they're not paying the counter company for an imputation service, which means that data is not very useful for citizens. So yeah, I would be very wary of like all the byte count data, but I could tell you confidently that Bike counts are pretty stable on all the counters. There was a big drop in COVID and now it's kicked back. And there's, a very slow but steady increase in cycling numbers in general.
Mm-hmm.
But one thing I can tell you for sure is every time you add a highly safe, protected bike infrastructure,
Mm-hmm.
that generates new traffic
It
uh,
does.
pretty solidly.
Well, what kind
And
of
it
increase, what kind of percentage increase we're took on average are we talking about? Or you comment, or you can't comment on that specifically?
I can comment because, well, I'd have to pull out my report somewhere, but I actually did. We did an interesting finding of our study is we
Mm-hmm.
tried to
Mm-hmm.
count the new rev on Saint Denis.
Right.
How much of those cyclists are new cyclists that did not exist before
Mm-hmm. Before the
versus
new infrastructure went in. So yes, is that what you're saying? Yeah.
yeah, exactly, versus cyclists that are just that used to take another path and now are taking that one.
Okay.
So one big argument for doing an infrastructure like that, especially in the downtown area,
Mm-hmm.
is that everything that's paint on a street is not bike infrastructure. I don't know how much I have to repeat this, but like a freaking bike logo on a road is actually negative because it signals to people that that's where bikes are supposed to go and they can't go anywhere else, when in reality bikes are allowed to go on any
Right.
street as long as
Right.
they're following the traffic, right?
Right.
So the freaking little sorry if I'm getting worked up, but the little painted bikes on the road are completely
I
useless.
completely hear you, by the way, because on Côte St. Catherine, sorry, where it goes through Outremont, there's a bike path and it ends conveniently at Côte des Neiges. And the politicians were making these bullshit excuses that they had the lines in the street for the bike path, right? And I said, that's not the same thing. I'm glad that you're confirming that bias that I had.
Yeah, so like if we're talking about bike infrastructure, to
Right,
me, it's like there's got to be a little green bollard, or it's got where there's going to be like a little
right,
cement median. That's
right,
bike infrastructure, and that's what we
right,
want. That's the real safe stuff. And
right,
what's interesting is when you create that infrastructure,
right,
people will leave the little silly paths and go on the main ones. They'll actually deviate and they'll be willing to. I think the number is like they're willing to deviate something like 1.6 kilometers on their route just to be on safe infrastructure. So we could build higher quality, safer infrastructure
mhm,
and then have less of those like less useful ones to make everybody happy. But to do that, we have to make choices, and sometimes we have to make sacrifices, like saying, for example, I don't know about the Terrebonne situation, but it seems to me like a very logical place to put a bike path, and that may punish a few people that can't park in front of their house now. Maybe there's a way to
I think
accommodate if it's
they're also
people with
very
special
annoyed that
needs,
it
but
went to a one-way street, so now it's like they have to loop the block to get to like their house. Like they created an inconvenience for a bunch of homeowners that arguably did make potentially $1 million investments that effectively had the rules changed on them
yeah,
after the
you
Well,
know
fact.
what though?
I heard
I don't.
what I heard too is that you're saying that because you build this really good bike path, this great infrastructure, people who were on other secondary roads are going to be coming to that, and it's going to actually free up space. Did I hear you correctly? But
Yes,
but the question remains the same, that there's this divergent traffic, right? So that's not new traffic. That traffic existed already, right? I'm going to
correct.
come back to the original question. If you build a secure bike path like they did on Terrebonne, right? Let's not include divergent traffic. Let's call new traffic. What is the average percent increase in new traffic that an infrastructure investment like this creates?
That's a really hard question to answer. I
Give
could
me your
tell you for
best
the rev,
guess.
the rev, because it's a big infrastructure. What we saw is that in the
When
non-downtown
you
parts,
rev, what do you mean by rev? I'm sorry.
the Saint Denis, the rev is the Réseau Express Vélo. It's like basically the bike highways, if you want.
Right, right,
So the Saint Denis bike lane is a fully protected, top of the line
right,
with
right.
bike signals.
Like the de Maisonneuve downtown. I
Correct.
mean, yeah,
So that one, the counters, for example, at De Castelnau, like up in like Villeray and farther,
right, right,
uh, almost 100% of the traffic there was purely generated by the bike infrastructure. So like all these new users that did not have a way to go downtown before, that are now like, hey, I can go downtown with my bike.
right.
And we're talking like really, I don't have the numbers in front of
When
me,
you
but
say
like pretty
100%, you mean double. You double the traffic because of the bike
um
path.
not doubled. Like there was no traffic there before, so it started with zero, and then all of the traffic, almost all of it, is newly generated.
Yeah, but
All
that's not
right. So
100%. That's like that's an
I'm not talking
infinity.
I'm not
Right.
talking about an increase. I'm talking about the proportion of ridership, right? So 100, almost 100%. Let's say 95% of the
Oh, I
ridership,
see what you're saying. Okay.
yeah, out of the
Is new.
proportion
Is
is
new.
new. Whereas in
Right.
the downtown section, it's
Right.
about half.
It's about
So
what?
it's about half.
So 50% more. Or
No, it's not. I'm not talking about increase.
50% of the riders. Sorry.
50% of the
50% of the
riders
riders is
counted
new.
at that spot are new,
Are new.
and then
Okay.
50% are people that are diverging from elsewhere.
I see.
So
Okay.
we
So
can
that puts the
assume
numbers in
that
context.
by
Yeah, but
building
that's a
the
50%
Terrebonne,
increase
but
in ridership. It is.
but
It's the
that's
same
in the
way.
downtown sector, because the numbers for the non-downtown sector were even higher. So we could argue that a place that has a bike path already, but now has a safer one, could be like at a 75% increase or something, because it would create
No,
new riders.
75% of riders are
Right,
Tell you what,
would
are
become
new.
new.
Yeah.
let's
Yeah.
make this easy for you.
Right.
I'll pull the graph for you because
I need an
I don't want to
abacus. A little
I don't
pie
want to
chart.
bring numbers out of my butt.
Nah, it's okay.
This is it right here. Okay, so you see this?
Right.
Okay, so what we're seeing here, green is what we called pent up demand. That means these are new riders that
Okay.
technically didn't exist before.
Right.
And yellow is riders that are diverted from elsewhere.
I see.
So this is Saint Denis. So this first graph here is the Rachel intersection. That's where those sensors are. So you can see, obviously, before 2021, there was no counter, so we have no idea.
Right. Right.
But from 21 to 22, you can see there's more than 100,000. So that's a lot of bikes.
Yeah. It is.
This is like the per day volume here.
Mm.
100. So you can see the seasons, obviously. So we have in 2024, we had almost 200,000 people using that bike path
A day?
per day. Yeah, that's the volume. That's huge.
That's massive.
A lot of
Yeah.
people.
Yeah.
Well,
But most
200,000
of
bikes,
that,
right? Like, not necessarily people.
pardon me?
You said it was the way it's counted. It would be 200,000 people on bikes passing by the counter. So there could
Correct.
be.
It's only bikes, because it's a pneumatic sensor that's below the pavement. And this one is not counting two-way people, because the rev is one lane, right? So
Right.
we're not counting twice people, right?
Right.
So here we go. So that's what it is. This is our volume right here, and the green is the actually newly generated, so less than 100,000. And then all the yellow area here is people that used to be cycling on another path and that are now cycling here. And you can see at the Bellechasse level, the green goes up a little bit in proportion. And then when you get to Castelnau and Sauvé, which is more like, Castelnau is basically in Villeray and Sauvé is in Ahuntsic, you can see that almost all of that ridership is purely new people, right? So what we're seeing here, the phenomenon, if you want to tell the narrative, is downtown safe infrastructure means that people that used to be in the car fume exhaust in a dangerous situation or on a shitty bike path, they're like, no, I want this safe biking infrastructure and I'm willing to divert to take it. So this is like what we're seeing here. Whereas in the north, we're seeing people who had no bike access because absolute hell to go anywhere meaningful on your bike are now like, hey, we have this new highway to go downtown.
Right.
We're going downtown on our bike. So this right here is people that are freeing up parking spaces and so on and so forth, right?
Interesting.
Or at least freeing up parking spaces in the downtown sector or wherever they're going, because even if it isn't in your neighborhood,
they're freeing it back home. They're freeing
like I used to go to the plateau by the bicycle.
They're freeing it in two places every time.
Places, yeah. It's a double whammy. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, hold on. We need to bring this guy back in the show.
All right. So okay, we are at 7:55. Alex is like a gremlin. If he isn't eating food by 8:01 p.m. and ideally 7:01 p.m., he turns into a monster. And
the steam engine needs coal to operate.
Bonjour Hi
It's running
artist will pull
dry.
up at your house and tag your door if Alex doesn't get food.
What?
I just said where
Where
it
did that
is.
come from? I don't
Just through the
understand.
grapevine. We just how we spread rumors. But yeah, thanks everybody for watching. A whole lot of you came through. We had some good questions, and yeah, no, it was a real blessing. But to have y'all here in the chat with us, thank you, Morse Attack, for coming through. Like a lot of us out here
Thank you.
are, I
Blessed.
guess, passenger seat experts, where we ride by with our passive, limited knowledge. But to have somebody who clearly works in the trenches and sees what it's actually like and sees how these decisions actually get made, it provides more insight into what gets talked about at a level that we're not included in, because let's be honest, the city might not be including us at this level of detail anywhere when they share it with us. So to have somebody like you come and share with us is a big blessing. So I wanted to thank you, and it would be great to have you back on the show. I'm
Yes,
certain there's
need
like
it back.
a whole bunch of other topics we could get into and maybe get
Housing.
more people's
You're an expert in
curiosity
housing as
up.
well, right? We need you
Housing
back
is
on
one of my favorite topics.
I'll
Yeah,
be
I'm
like, have
doing
him back in housing. Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
I'm doing a big project on housing and land values right now.
Yeah, I
So
want to talk to you about housing as well. Yeah, there's gonna be an interesting
Yeah.
conversation.
So we appreciate that, everybody that came to watch. It means the world to us, and we'll be back next Tuesday with somebody else. I don't know who, and we'll figure it out. But
I
if you
don't know
want to be
how
on the
so-
show, if you want to be on
I
the
have some
show
ideas.
and share your knowledge with us, if
Please.
you want to promote a business, or if you want, like, you're anything, we try to keep it
Artists.
NDG centric. And so whatever you do out there, I mean, yo, if you
Sports.
happen to do a dog walking club and that's what your jam is, we'll bring you up on here and learn all about the art
I
of
like
dog walking
dogs.
and DG.
Ruff, ruff.
So we appreciate all of you. This is a community show. The algorithms are never going to love us because we're so NDG centric. So we
That's
rely on
right.
you, the fine
But I
people
love you,
of the
Holden.
community, to share the word.
I
Let
love
people
you,
know the
Morse Attack. That
Trainman
was a
exists, that
great
we
show.
want to bring value to the community. And through you telling people to come watch us every Tuesday at 6 p.m., we get more viewerships. More viewerships will lead to more resources. More resources means to better shows that gives you more valuable. It's like a reciprocal relationship, like the cycles he was describing with the whack-a-mole. If you help us, we can do more for you. Appreciate everyone there. Like, comment, subscribe, share. I'm so sorry for missing the YouTube comments. I just see how we had Zvi and Andy over there on YouTube out there talking, and I just missed them all for the Facebook. That's it. This is a popular episode. Thank you all for real. It touches our hearts. Appreciate you all again one more time, and y'all live long and prosper, everybody out there in the fine world of the universe.
There we
Morse
go.
Attack, can they keep in touch with you in any way, or are we trying to stay anonymous?
no, you can if you're interested in my music or my art, you could check me out at Morse. I think it's an underscore, or just write Morse Attack on Instagram and you'll find me for sure.
Bet.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks again, everyone.